Not again. The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. I will make them pay for what they've done.
Gatekeeping. A truly unnecessary and foolish concept that has weirdly existed within human culture for a very long time. Right now, it is running rampant through the Trek community, but it has also reared its ugly head in almost every recent major pop culture franchise. Today, I want to talk about why gatekeeping exists, its history, and how we as pop culture fans can possibly avoid using this type of argument in the future. This is Ketwalski. First, let's define gatekeeping for those that aren't fully aware, and so that we have a baseline to work off of. Gatekeeping is when someone takes it upon themselves to decide who does or does not have access or rights to a community or identity. A common example of this would be, you are not a true fan of XYZ if you don't know, like, or agree with ASDF. While the concept of gatekeeping is often satirized through memes, it is a very common argument between fans of a specific thing. Can't name all 35 professional football teams in the NFL? Well, of course you can't, because there's only 32 of them, and a true fan would have known that. I was exposed to gatekeeping during the early years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was young enough to have watched Saturday morning cartoons while still reading the comics, while also being the primary target audience for the MCU with its first film Iron Man in 2008. At the time, I had recently joined the military, so I was surrounded by men and women of varying ages and interest. When I brought up how much I liked the film at work, I was weirdly confronted by an older man, we'll call him Tony, about how I wasn't a true fan of Marvel if I liked the movie. Tony went on to explain that I couldn't possibly appreciate the franchise or comics because I was just a millennial who wanted to watch a horrible and terribly made popcorn flick that didn't capture the essence of Iron Man very well. Now, some of you might be thinking that I wouldn't remember this much about a conversation that happened almost 10 years ago, but I can assure you that I do. It was an impactful moment in my life. And I know that might seem strange to say, but it really was. This was the first time someone told me that I wasn't a fan of something that I enjoyed. And being really young at the time, I didn't even know how to respond back to Tony. And I even agreed with him about his assertion because I didn't know what else to say. I know I'm not alone in this. Gatekeeping was an extremely common argument online between MCU fans and vanilla comic fans. The argument eventually subsided for the most part as the MCU continued to rise in popularity, but it's still out there to this day. Again, this exists in literally everything. You're not a real gamer if you didn't build your PC. You don't know art unless you know about this artist. You're not a Star Wars fan if you like the prequels. Actually, I think that one's dead now. So now this brings us to the franchise at hand, Star Trek. There are those who use the entire franchise as a gatekeep unto itself, but the problem is much more ingrained into the fandom than just the surface level. I believe that the first sign of gatekeeping within the fandom really kicked up right as the next generation was announced. While I'm sure there was some outliers trying to keep the film franchise fans at arm's length with a "you're not a fan of Trek unless you watched it during the original airing on television" argument, the gatekeeping didn't really start that much, at least in my opinion, until TNG was starting out its first few seasons. However, similarly to that of Marvel, a lot of these arguments and critiques faded away as TNG became more popular within the culture. Then we got another dose of it when DS9 was announced because it was breaking with the Star Trek formula by not taking place on a ship, and the show was much more darker in tone. Over time, again, that argument faded. However, the reason for the gatekeeping did shift from one issue to another, but the argument itself never went away. Eventually, we arrive at Star Trek Enterprise.
I think about recommending seatbelts when we get home.
It's just a little bad weather.
Star Trek Enterprise.
Now, because this is a prequel series, it guaranteed there was going to be continuity errors between it and the other 4 television shows and the numerous films. As such, many fans wrote it off as terrible, not canon, and part of the reason the franchise went silent for so many years. Indeed, a very common phrase used online was, "If you like Enterprise, then you're not a true fan of Star Trek." Unsurprisingly, as time went on, opinions seemed to shift away from hating on Enterprise into a retrospective question of, was it really that bad? And the answer most seem to conclude is, well, no. This has recently occurred within the Star Wars fandom regarding the prequel trilogy as well. I would say a lot of articles came out defending and explaining these films to try and get the bad taste out of everyone's mouth so that Disney could start making more prequel-related stuff, but now it has shifted almost entirely into the prequels aren't really that bad. Well, what could have caused that change? Well, none other than Star Wars The Last Jedi. I'm not going to get into this movie, but I do believe the fan backlash and the film's poor quality has literally painted the prequels in a new light for Star Wars fans. So what would have caused the sudden spark in Trekkies reevaluating the quality of Star Trek Enterprise? Well, that would be none other than Star Trek Discovery. One of the more frequent comments I see on my videos, and all around YouTube, states that if you like Star Trek Discovery, then you're not a real fan of the franchise, or that you're some kind of NPC, SJW, CBS shill. And then, the gatekeeping goes in the opposite direction to combat this position with phrases like, you're not a real fan if you hate Discovery, or you're not a real fan unless you like all of Star Trek, period, point blank. Both groups here are in the wrong, and I personally have been sitting inside of both camps at different times, whether it was through my videos posted to YouTube or in conversations with other Trekkies in real life. So there's no denying that gatekeeping exists, varying wildly from person to person and topic to topic. The question I now have is why? Why do we do this to each other? To answer this, I'm going to look introspectively at my own behavior. Part of my identity is labeling myself as a Star Trek fan. And because it's part of my identity, my ego will be attached to it in some form or fashion, along with a sense of ownership over the franchise, as if it's somehow beholden to me in some way because I've been a fan for so long. So, if someone comes up to me and says, I've only seen the new JJ Trek films, but I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, yeah, just saying that makes me feel uncomfortable. Like, how could you be a Trek fan and only have seen the recent movies? I want to tell this imaginary person to go sit and binge all 700 plus episodes of Trek and then come back to me about their fandom status. Part of me would say this because I feel like this person perhaps has an experience of what Trek has to offer and they're missing out. Part of me wants them to go through all the good and bad episodes like I had to kind of earn their stripes at being a fan. For instance, most of the times you don't get to be a first-string NFL quarterback right out of college. You got to hone your skills and wait your turn to shine. So why doesn't that work here? It feels like it kind of should, but then again, this isn't a show of skills or experience. It's just somebody enjoying something the way that they want to. So why would I want to take away from that and force a requirement onto their fan status? Well, for me, thinking about it heavily, I think it boils down to this. If you don't fit into what I consider to be a correct form of fandom, then you are affecting my identity as a Trekkie. So the question now is, how do I stop myself from doing this to other people? Well, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer, and even my introspective reason for gatekeeping will not be applicable to everyone. But I think a good first step, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, is to look within yourself and identify the why. Then remain cognizant of how your answers affect your judgment and your interaction with other people. I think by naming it and being aware of it, you can then try to work around it. And that's the only way we can really break the habit of gatekeeping. Maybe one day we'll all get to a place where we let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. Because as long as it's not hurting anyone, what's the real harm? So now I put the question back onto all of you. Have you gatekeeped someone in the past? And if so, why? Do you think gatekeeping has a place within the fandom that is positive in nature? Also, feel free to share a story about when this may have even happened to you.